Tiger's body slammed to the canvas with a sickening crack. The crowd fell silent, the air thick with tension. As Lena rushed to his side, his eyes locked with hers, fear and trust mingling in a single tear. He whispered, "Sorry." But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air in the arena was thick with a tension that vibrated through every corner of the Colosseum. Tiger lay motionless on the cold mat, his once pristine body now twisted and broken beneath the weight of failure. His chest heaved in shallow gasps, the air scraping in and out as his limbs refused to respond. He had been here before. The pain, the exhaustion, the never-ending battle against a body that betrayed him, but never this close to the edge. This time, it felt different. The fight had drained everything from him, and now nothing remained but the agony of knowing that his dreams were slipping away, just out of reach. The silence that followed the fall was deafening, wrapping around him like a shroud. The crowd's excitement had evaporated, leaving an unsettling void that pressed down on his chest, suffocating him. It was in that moment, as his vision blurred and his mind began to surrender, that she appeared. Lena Carter's entrance into the chaos was nothing like the dramatic flair of the wrestlers who dominated the spotlight. There were no roaring cheers or dramatic fanfare for her. She was a shadow, swift and efficient, with a calmness that cut through the frantic pulse of the arena. Her focus was absolute, her presence like a cool breeze in the midst of a storm. Lena was no stranger to the brutality of the ring. She had witnessed countless injuries over the years, each more devastating than the last. But this one, this fragile young man, whose life had been reduced to nothing but a dream shattered on the floor, felt different. She kneeled beside him, her fingers brushing against the rawness of his skin, assessing the damage with the practiced touch of someone who had seen the worst the human body could endure. Her heart beat faster, but her hands were steady, betraying none of the anxiety that gnawed at her insides. She didn't need to see the defeated look in Tiger's eyes to know what he was feeling. She knew it all too well. She had watched too many fighters like him break, their dreams reduced to nothing more than broken bones and crushed spirits. But not this time, not on her watch. Her voice, though soft, was firm, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. "You're not done yet, kid," she murmured, more to herself than to him, but the words were a promise that she would pull him back from the brink of darkness. The crowd continued to roar, oblivious to the battle being waged beyond the ring's violence, but Lena's world had narrowed down to just one thing: saving him. She could feel the weight of his body, fragile under her hands, yet she knew his spirit was far stronger. The world outside may have been falling apart, but in this moment, in the raw vulnerability between them, Lena was resolute. She would not let him fade, not like this. As the crowd's roar reached a deafening crescendo, Lena's focus remained unbroken. She was his anchor, holding him in the present as his body teetered between life and death. And for the first time in this brutal match, Tiger could feel the faintest flicker of hope stirring in his chest. The sterile walls of the hospital room became a prison for Tiger. Each morning, the same bright light stabbed at his eyes, pulling him from sleep into a reality that felt like a cruel mockery of the world he had once dominated. The agony that rippled through his body was a constant companion. Joints stiff, muscles torn, and his chest ached with the weight of unfulfilled ambition. But it was his heart, heavy and fractured, that hurt the most. The fight was gone. The dream he had clung to so tightly that it had become a part of him had slipped through his fingers in a moment of crushing defeat. There was nothing left but the void of his own thoughts, swirling around in an endless loop of failure. But then there was Lena. Always Lena. Her presence, soft yet unyielding, anchored him in a world that threatened to spiral beyond his reach. At first, she was nothing more than a duty, just the medic, the woman who had patched him up and dragged him from the brink of death. Her words, though kind, were a blur in his fog of confusion and resentment. "You're not done yet," she had said. But how could she understand? She had no idea what it felt like to have everything you ever dreamed of slip away in the blink of an eye. And yet, she kept coming. She stood by his side day after day, her eyes filled with a quiet determination that began to gnaw at the walls of his apathy. Her encouragement was like an unrelenting tide, wearing down the walls of his resistance. Each session felt like a battle, his body screaming at him to stop, to give in, to sink into the comfort of his pain. But Lena would not allow it. She was there, patient and unwavering, guiding him through every excruciating movement, reminding him that survival was about more than just the physical wounds. At first, he resisted her. He hated her optimism, the way she seemed to see something in him that he couldn't see himself. It felt like betrayal, like she was trying to force him into something he wasn't ready for. But slowly, beneath the thick layers of anger and despair, something began to stir. He began to notice the quiet strength in her, the resilience that reflected his own, buried somewhere deep within. Lena wasn't just fighting for him, she was fighting for life itself, for the hope that every moment mattered, even when it seemed like all was lost. The days bled into weeks, and with each passing one, Tiger's body began to heal. His strength returned in slow, agonizing bursts, but it was more than just muscle and bone regaining their strength. His spirit was mending too, piece by piece. He started to see Lena not just as the medic who saved him, but as something more, something that went beyond the sterile walls of this hospital room. She was hope, a living, breathing testament to the power of resilience. Her sacrifices, her own battles that he had never fully understood, now seemed just as real, just as painful as his own. The bond between them deepened in a way Tiger couldn't quite name. It wasn't just a mentor-pupil relationship, nor was it some fleeting romantic fantasy. It was something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. She was a mirror to his own fight for survival, and in her presence, he began to see the possibility of a future beyond the pain. The hope she embodied was contagious, and with each passing day, it seeped into him, until it was no longer a distant concept, but a flame that burned brightly within him. This wasn't just about a title. It was about second chances. It was about a life that could still be lived, even after the worst kind of fall. And somehow, with Lena by his side, Tiger began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done yet either. The roar of the crowd thundered in Tiger's ears, a wave of sound that threatened to drown him, to swallow him whole. The familiar pulse of adrenaline surged through him, but this time it felt distant, like an echo of the man he used to be, the man who had once fought for glory with unshakable confidence. Now each movement in the ring felt like a battle against his own body. His muscles were still bruised, his bones not yet fully healed. The weight of every strike was more than just physical. It was a reminder of his limitations, a cruel mocking of his own fragility. Yet here he was, once again in the ring, not for the title, but for redemption, for her. His every move was calculated, sharp, desperate. The pain was always there, a constant companion, gnawing at him, pulling him back with every jab. He could feel the rawness of his injuries, his ribs aching, his joints protesting, but his mind refused to acknowledge it. He had to keep going. He had to prove something to himself, to Lena, the one person who had believed in him when he had long stopped believing in himself. But as the fight wore on, a gnawing sense of unease began to creep in. It wasn't just the pain anymore. It was something darker, something more sinister. His body was no longer responding with the same fluidity, the same speed. His movements were sluggish, his strikes less precise. He could feel the tendons in his legs pulling, straining, as if they might snap at any moment. His opponent, sensing the weakness, began to press harder. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, everything went wrong. A vicious blow to his ribs. His vision blurred and the world tilted. He stumbled, the shock of the strike reverberating through his chest like a crack in a fragile vase. Pain, raw and unrelenting, washed over him in waves. His breath hitched, shallow, like it couldn't quite reach the depths it needed. His limbs betrayed him in that instant, refusing to cooperate, locking up like a machine whose gears had rusted. His mind screamed for him to stand, to fight, but his body was no longer his own. The floor rushed up to meet him, his body hitting the canvas with a sickening thud that made his bones ache in a way they never had before. The crowd's noise turned to a muffled hum, as if the world had momentarily paused in disbelief. And then, silence. The kind of silence that settles deep in your bones, the kind that fills a room with an overwhelming weight. A terrifying stillness that felt like the quiet before something inevitable, something horrifying. Tiger lay there, unmoving, the world pressing in on him as the darkness threatened to consume him whole. Lena. She was already there, her movements sharp and urgent. He heard her voice, though it felt distant, heard the crack of her breath as she rushed to his side, her hands already assessing, already working. But this was different. He knew it. She knew it. The breath in his chest was shallow, faint, his heartbeat faltering like a dying ember struggling to stay alive. Time felt stretched, agonizingly slow, every second that passed a painful eternity. But as her hands touched his chest, his eyes fluttered open, and he found her, standing over him like an angel in a storm. Their gazes met, and everything else fell away. The crowd, the arena, the pain, they all blurred into the background. In those final moments, Tiger could see the raw fear in her eyes, the desperation that mirrored his own. And then, as if it were the last thing he could give, a single tear slid down his cheek, trailing through the dust on his skin, an apology he didn't know how to express in words. He mouthed the only thing that felt right, the only thing that mattered, sorry. And then, nothing. The weight of the moment bore down on Lena, a crushing burden she hadn't anticipated when she first stepped into the arena. The decision, no, the necessity, of what she was about to do was excruciating, a finality that threatened to undo everything she had worked for. The room seemed to close in around her, the chaos of the crowd nothing more than a distant hum, muffled by the thundering pulse of her own heartbeat. She looked down at Tiger, at the man she had fought to save, at the shattered version of the fighter who had once burned with promise, with ambition. Now he lay broken before her, his body an assortment of crumpled lines, bruises, and the telltale stillness of something gone irrevocably wrong. His chest rose and fell, but it was labored, strained, each breath a monumental effort. She could feel the pressure of his body against her hands, cold and unresponsive, and for the first time she was confronted with the stark truth. There was nothing left to give. There was no more hope to offer. The damage had already been done. Irreversible. Irreversible. Her hands shook as she reached for her radio, calling for the paramedics. Her voice, steady but hollow, cut through the ringing silence that seemed to pervade the entire arena. They would come, they would move him, but she already knew what they would find. His body, once a symbol of unyielding strength and discipline, had become just another casualty, another person left in the wake of a sport that demanded too much, a sport that stripped away pieces of its participants until there was nothing left to take. The crowd, once so eager to cheer, now sat in stunned quiet, their applause stolen by the brutal sight of a young man's dreams crumbling before them. As the medical team rushed onto the scene, Lena couldn't move. Her feet felt anchored to the floor, as if the gravity of the moment had rooted her in place. She could see Tiger's face now, pale, streaked with sweat, the once bright spark in his eyes nothing but a dim, fading light. He looked so fragile, so distant from the towering figure that had commanded the ring just days ago. How could this be the same man? How could his body, so full of potential, have betrayed him so completely? The stretcher came, and as the paramedics gently lifted him, Lena stood there, her gaze never leaving him. She had given everything. She had been his lifeline, his anchor in the storm. But now, standing there, watching him drift away from her, she felt like the lifeline had snapped. Her role as his savior had been an illusion, and she was left to face the cold reality of her own helplessness. The arena, once a cacophony of cheers and excitement, was now eerily silent, the kind of silence that swallowed everything in its path. The fans, the spectators, the fighters, all of them knew the truth. The disaster had unfolded before their eyes, and no one could deny it. The young prodigy who had once held the world in his hands was now just another name, another story of broken dreams in a sport that consumed too many. That silence, that collective holding of breath, lingered in the air, heavier than any applause ever could be. And, in the midst of it, Lena realized there was no more fight left for her to give. She had done all she could, but sometimes even the strongest hands could not piece a shattered life back together.